Okay, so we are, it'd be really good if I had my mic on. Anyway, so we are, we've already talked about some of Beowulf. We talked, kind of went through all of his finding out about Hrothgar's predicament with Grendel coming and attacking Hrothgar's hall. And so now he's come and he's actually spoken directly to the king after getting clearance to come in. And then Wolfgar, essentially one of the Danelord's thanes, speaks to Beowulf at the mead hall, and then he says, what he's here for and everything. And so he tells Hrothgar, he actually goes to the king, and these are all kind of, speeches. So this is a very formal sort of way of doing things. I'm sure it wasn't as formal back then, but we just don't know. But it's still kind of takes an epic tone to it, and that's kind of what we're dealing with here. But he essentially says, "Go ahead and Hrothgar, I suggest you listen to him because I think he's going to really. First of all, he's super impressive, and all of the people he brought with him, all of his warriors are really impressive looking, and so let's." What I would go ahead and talk to him. Now, what's funny though is Hrothgar says, I knew him. So even though they're not of the same tribe, they knew each other. And he actually knew and was friends with Ecgtheow, who is Beowulf's father. And he even knows kind of who he married, and when there were times when they were battling near each other or together. And so he's heard really good things about Beowulf. So, Beowulf heard about Hrothgar. Hrothgar heard about Beowulf and how, that he's famous for battle and he has the strength of 30 men. And the truth is, he really does. He does, because otherwise he would not be capable of doing the things that he does in this battle. And so but then of course, they bring in, and remember, we talked about how the scribes that finally wrote this down, this epic poem, which had been passed down orally for centuries, the scribes were religious. They were probably priests. And so they, infused a bit of Catholicism into what was going on. Now, I say Catholicism just because at this time, there was no other, I mean, there were only two forms of Christianity at this time: Holy Roman Catholic and Eastern or Greek Orthodox. And the Holy Roman Catholic Church used a Latin Bible, the Greek Orthodox Church used a Greek Bible, and yet they were very formalistic. They don't really, even the Catholic Church back then doesn't really look a whole lot like the Catholic Church today, but because it was much more formal. All of the services were in Latin. The Bible was in Latin. You actually couldn't translate it. So it's honestly kind of amazing that this wasn't written in Latin, but it wasn't. The scribes actually wrote it down from the Old English, and they even kept the Old English lettering and things like that. So that's why we know it was written pretty early in the medieval period, because of the spelling and everything, and the letters that were used. Eventually, those letters will disappear out of English, but for a while we've got them. Anyway, so these are very formalistic, but they do make references, and Beowulf will make several references to God, and yet the actual culture that where this came from was pagan. So they did not, they had, when at the time this probably arose, they probably had not even encountered Christianity. So, but this is being written down by scribes, and therefore we have that kind of overlay of that's why Cain is supposed to be the ancestor of Grendel, because Cain slew his brother and then was marked, biblically. So it kind of goes with the Bible. So anyway, he essentially says, "Oh, I heard he was really awesome," and he even says, he says, this is what Hrothgar says: "I have hopes that holy God in his goodness sends him to us to fight Grendel's terror." So he's hoping that that's why Beowulf has come. And so they kind of exchange those kinds of words. And the hero gets up, Beowulf, he's already a hero, even though he hasn't done anything yet. And essentially, they all go in and stand under Harrod's roof, and then Beowulf speaks to him directly. Now, of course, he's still armed. He's still in chainmail. He's still wearing, all of his weaponry except, like a sword or something. And so he greets him directly. And then he very quickly says, I have come because of Grendel. We heard about what Grendel has been doing to you, and it's horrible. And so people told me I should come. And I, you know, then he brags. He says, they've seen me return from battle. And he even says, I bound 5, destroying monstrous kin, killing sea demons. So he kind of brags about now this is normal. It's very normal for a warrior at this time to do this, to say, this is what I've done. It's almost like an interview. Like, here's my, track record, and here's how I've been successful in my previous job, that's kind of thing. But he's killed sea demons. So, he fought water monsters, even in the middle of the night. And we're going to find out more about that. But he says, now I seek Grendel to settle the matter alone with that troll. And so that's what he's asking, essentially. Let me come and cleanse Herod. Let me. So allow me with my people to fight Grendel and get rid of him. Which is, most people will go, yeah, sure, please, please kill the Grendel for us, because yuck. Because we're tired of dying, But he says, essentially, I've heard too that this evil monster, reckless indeed, scorns the use of weapons. In other words, I've heard that using swords isn't going to work on him because he's bewitched or something. And, it's kind of like Achilles, and the sword's not going to hurt him. So, and he says, this is another, you call it a brag, except it's true. I will forego the bearing of a sword or broad shield. I'm not going to be armed. By my hand grip alone, I'm going to fight with this fiend life for life, foe against foe. Whichever death takes must deem it the judgment of God. So, it's kind of like back with the Achilles, with this idea of accepting fate. Well, if it's my fate to die, then I will. But in this case, it's the judgment of God. If God deems me best, I will win. If he deems the other one best, then I will lose and I will die, and I will take it. So I'll accept death, but I want to fight Grendel. And he says he thinks, Grendel's formidable, but he says Grendel will wish, if he can devour all of us Gates in the war hall without fear, I think, as he has before. Essentially, he's going to assume he can come in and do that. And if he can, then he'll just eat me. So you'll not need to shroud my face. He will have my blood-stained body if death takes me. So it's funny because even in the Iliad, remember how much they were talking about burial. And in this case, he says, you're not going to need to bury me because he'll eat me. If he wins, I'll be dead and eaten. And so all you'll have is maybe some blood to clean up, because he feeds on flesh. And so it's really macabre. It's extremely realistic too, in that he's not coming in going, oh, I know I'm going to win. He says it could go either way. But and first he says God is in charge, but then he says fate ever does as it must. So he is accepting fate too. And this definitely is a parallel with the Iliad. And Hrothgar is like, yay, he's so happy. And then he tells some good things about his dad. And then his dad actually fought someone and it started a feud. And so he came here and stayed with him for a while, stayed with Hrothgar to, get away, kind of like exile or something. And he was just a young king when all that happened. So, but now all of this, has been settled. Obviously the dad has passed away. And he's sad. He goes, it saddens my heart to tell any man what shame Grendel brings to Herod. So he has to admit, my guards haven't been successful against him. Now, and this is a big problem because what's their job? Their job is to protect Herod, and yet they can't. His own warriors aren't doing it. And so someone has to come in from the outside. Beowulf has to come in from the outside to do this. And yet, he still has hope. Because Beowulf is coming, he doesn't have any more hope that his own warriors will do it. But he has hope now that Beowulf's there. And he describes the blood in the hall. He describes the loss, how many people he's lost, and all of his warriors that were, where there was blood, where there used to be a person, and how horrible it was. And so it was just really sad. But essentially, he's hopeful now, and so they even get a little happy. They gather together. Everybody's a little. They even have some joy. There's even a bard singing in Harrod. Of course, now what's going to happen? Well, they're singing and they're they're having revelry, and that's going to bring Grendel. And so and they all know it. They normally would have all avoided this and they would never have partied in the hall, but now they're going to party in the hall, but they also know what's going to happen. Okay, but before that happens, Unferth comes in. Now, Unferth, you do need to know his name. You do need to know that he was a character in here. Just really, there are only some basic things, so Beowulf matters, Unferth matters, Hrothgar matters. I don't think I'm going to ask you about Hughlac because he's not really a character in there. He's just the king of the gates while Beowulf is. But then at the very end, Wiglaf is going to come up. And so that's it. But that's the reading that we'll discuss next week, the second half of Beowulf. But Unferth comes in, and Unferth is one of Hrothgar's warriors. So he hasn't been killed by the Grendel, but he has not won. He hasn't battled Grendel and faced him and won. So he's one of the reasons why Grendel's still marauding, is because he hasn't stopped him. Okay, but he's jealous. So here comes Beowulf looking impressive, boasting about his stuff and everything. And Unferth says, "Aren't you that guy? I heard about you. Aren't you the guy who battled Brecca, raced Brecca in the open sea, and you lost? Isn't that what happened? You boasted you could beat him and you lost. You risked your lives and no one could dissuade you from the contest. And you were out there swimming and swimming, and you swam for 7 nights in the water, but then he beat you. Didn't he win?" So he's snide. He's being, honestly, this is not what you do when people are your guests. You don't pick up things that you think, might hurt their feelings or give them embarrassment. And yet he does. He says, didn't you swim against Brecca and then lose? Ha 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 ha. And you boasted that you would win, but you totally didn't. And you actually dare to fight Grendel. Should you dare wait for Grendel, you realize he's going to get you. And then Beowulf says, "Unferth, my friend," which is really funny because he's not. But he says, "You must be drunk." He even says, "You're drunk on beer. You've talked a lot about Brecca and told of his efforts. The truth is, I won that race. In fact, I not only won, yes, we were young. We had agreed when we were lads and vowed that we would risk our lives on the sea. So we promised we would race, and we did. Okay, and we even had swords. We swam with swords close to hand, like literally. We're out swimming in the water, but we had, because we had to protect ourselves from the whales. And he even says he was not faster than me, and he couldn't get away from me. And so we were right there together on the sea. And it said for 5 nights, but then the waves parted us and everything got dark. There was a storm and the sea creatures got mad. So the storm happens and the sea creatures were angered. And he goes, "My chainmail helped me then because they tried to bite at me, but it kept me safe." Okay. But then one monster actually grabbed me and dragged me down. But then I took, of course, the sword and I killed it. In the swirl, I killed the mighty sea beast with my own hand. Okay. And then he says, all these other creatures were after me too. So I served them with my dear sword too. So chop, 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 chop. I killed all these sea creatures. And they're all laying on the seafloor now. And a lot of them ended up beached on the sand. So everybody knew I'd killed them. Everybody could see all the different sea creatures that I'd murdered. I fought off and slew to save myself. And so it's funny, and he even says, he goes, I slew 9 creatures. And I've never heard of anybody swimming for 5 days who ends up in a sea storm who who kills 9 sea creatures while he's out swimming. So don't talk to me, Unferth, because you haven't fought like that with your blade. Brecca didn't do it. Brecca didn't fight monsters. Brecca didn't do any of that stuff that I did, and neither have you. So he's essentially saying, see, I'm better than you are, Unferth, so shush, be quiet. And then he even says, moreover, not only have you not done anything like that with your own sword, but moreover, you killed your brother, slew your close kin. Now, we don't have any other background. We don't know, like, there's no story of Unferth that has survived or something. We don't know what happened with Unferth, but the fact that Grendel is descendant from Cain, who killed his brother, Cain and Abel, but then Unferth supposedly killed his brother. And he says, despite your wit, you in hell shall suffer torment. Now, that hell part, of course, is the religion, the light on top of it. But he said, I mean, this is bad. You don't kill your own kin. Even in tribal loyalty, you absolutely don't kill your own brother. And so he says, not only did you were wrong about the fight, I actually slew 9 monsters and won the swimming contest. And you haven't ever done anything like that. In fact, you killed your brother. And if you were doing your job, Grendel would never have wreaked such havoc on your king if you were so good a warrior as you claim to be. So he brings up all, so Unferth came to embarrass him, and instead he turns it around and says, oh no, you need to be embarrassed. You need to be embarrassed because A, you killed your own brother. B, you're wrong about the details of my feats because I'm better than that. And you also haven't defended against Grendel, and that was your job. And so Unferth should be embarrassed. He absolutely was taken down like 4 notches just now. But then he goes, of course, Grendel's been facing you guys, and obviously you guys haven't been fighting him off. So when he comes tonight, he expects no fight from the Spear Danes. That's you guys. But I'll show him, our tribe, the gates, strength and stomach for war. So we're going to get him. You guys can't fight him off. He isn't afraid of y'all, but he'll be afraid of us because we're going to get him and we will destroy him. And then after we're done, a man will be able to go to drink mead bravely again here. Everything's going to be pretty. We're going to have defeated Grendel. So he boasts, oh, not only have I done all these things, you haven't, and I'm going to be the one who does it here and saves the day. And so everybody is happy except for probably Unferth, but they don't mention him again, not until later. And so then here comes Wealhtheow, that's Hrothgar's queen, and she walks around and feeds, fills people's cups with wine and, well, ale and mead, and passes out little rings and stuff like that. And then eventually she's going to help with when you hand out treasure. So she's actually going to do a lot of that stuff too. But and then of course Beowulf boasts some more. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. And everybody's, they're just partying. So this is all just kind of boasting and stuff like that. Now, then Hrothgar and a bunch of his people, most of his people, leave the hall. So he goes to his private rooms because he's the king, so he can do that. But the Lord in his glory, so this is again more Christianity stuck on top, left in place that guard against Grendel. And so God brought Beowulf to take care of Grendel. That's essentially what the deal is. And Beowulf's just waiting. Beowulf actually doesn't, while everybody else is drinking and drinking and drinking, Beowulf doesn't drink. And so now he's just waiting. He actually takes off his armor and puts his sword away. Remember, he said he was going to fight him without armor and told him to guard his battle gear. And he says, he goes, I don't think I'm any weaker than Grendel. So I'll not take his life, not destroy him with my sword, though I surely can't. Now he actually can't because Grendel's body is impervious to swords. So essentially he says, though, I am just going to fight him with my bare hands. And then again, he repeats then the holy God, the wise Lord will grant the glory to whichever seems fitting. So he's accepting fate. I could die or he could die. And then he lays down. Now he doesn't sleep. Everybody else lies down too. And they all think, okay, we could all die tonight, but they're willing to face it because they want to try to stop Grendel's reign of terror. Okay. And so everybody lies down, but Beowulf kind of keeps his eyes open. Okay, he's waiting. And he's ready. He's so ready. Kind of ready, like Achilles was ready to go and fight in the against once Patroclus died, then Achilles was ready to fight too. Okay, so then in the darkest night came the wanderer in shadow, and this is the best scene. I almost want to read it in Old English, but I'm not going to do it because it takes too much time. But it's the best scene because it's so well described in Old English. It sounds so guttural and mean and bloody and everything. But here comes Grendel. The warriors guarding the horned hall all slept. Men knew that they could not be drawn by that ill-doer down into shadow if the Maker willed it not. All but one. So all of the warriors that came with Beowulf are sleepy, and they all fall asleep. Beowulf does not. He is ready. His eyes are open. He's just waiting. He watched, wild and indignant, awaited, anger rising, the battle's outcome. He wants to fight. It's like, think about football. Everybody's like, well, he's kind of in that mode. He's ready to do battle. And then here comes Grendel. Bearing God's wrath, Grendel came loping. The foul creature meant to try a sample. So he wanted to go in. He was going to go in the hall, take a few men, eat them, And of course, it wasn't the first time he'd done it. It even says that it wasn't the first time he'd sought out Hrothgar's homestead. But never in his day, nor before or since, have hall thanes found worse fortune because of him. So in other words, no one's ever attacked a hall the way that he has. And so he's going. Door braced with iron bands sprang free at his touch. So he easily breaks in. And he's enraged now, planning evil. So he's just such a vile, monstery, whatever. Then swiftly, he goes across the patterned floor, finds the people. He sees many a spearman, a crowd. Of course, these are all the gates, sleeping, in a heap. And he's like, woo-hoo! Finally, we got people sleeping in the hall again. I can eat. Because remember, they've been hiding remember, this was 12 years of ravaging through everything and killing people. So now people mostly hide from him. But here's the hall. He heard the noise anyway. But he comes to the hall and it's got people in it. Woo! And they're all sleeping. Then his heart leapt. And he was determined to tear the life from each body before dawn. So he was going to eat them all. That was his plan. But such is fate. He would never more feed on human flesh after that night. Nope. So he thinks, 15 people. Oh, I'm going to eat them all before dawn. I got time. And instead, it tells us very quickly, his fate is not that. His fate will mean he will never eat another person after tonight. For that man of might, Beowulf saw how the vicious killer would try for a sudden onslaught. And so if essentially, first thing, Grendel goes right up to a person who's sleeping, picks him up, swiftly seized the chance given, grabbed a sleeper and tore him apart, bit to the bone, drank the heart's blood, swallowing swathes. Soon he'd eaten the dead man, consumed him utterly, head to foot. So he literally chomped him down and ate him right there. Pressing in closer then. So now he's going to the next person. Of course, who's the next person? And it's Beowulf. He thought to drag the steadfast hero from sleep. Of course, the hero's not asleep. So he reaches out, grabs him, and you can't tell exactly who the he is, but that's Beowulf. But Beowulf quickly saw what his intent was and gripped his arm back. Okay, so here's Grendel reaching out to get him, and instead Beowulf grabs him by the arm. And now he's like, wait a second, somebody's grabbing me. It's like two murderers facing each other or something. But he said he'd never met a tighter grip from another creature. And suddenly Grendel wants to get out. He's like, oh no, he's got me by the arm. And he's not letting go. In his heart, he feared for his life, couldn't wait for a chance to run. So he's not so courageous when he actually is facing any actual fight. And so, I mean, again, all he did, everything up to this point, he's just found all these warriors sleeping, and he's just slurps them down. Now he's facing some dude who's grabbed him by the arm and isn't going to let go. And this is scary. And so here comes Beowulf. He rises up out of he pretended to be asleep, but he wasn't asleep. Rises up, gripping the guy's arm tight, and his fingers bursting. And the troll is retreating, the man is advancing. And so all from the moment he gets grabbed by Beowulf, all he wants to do is leave. Grendel's just like, eh, because he's a weenie. So we don't know that. We think he's just a big monster who could, is impossible to stop. He thinks he is too. And yet here's this guy who's strong enough to not let go and to actually cause him harm. And so he's trying to leave, but he felt fingers fail at his foe's grasp. So in other words, the guy's cutting off the blood circulation to his arm, and everything becomes noisy. So they're like swirling around in the room. They're knocking stuff over. Everybody wakes up. All the people who were sleeping, except for that guy that was swallowed, of course. And they're just wrestling with each other. The walls resounded. It was a wonder the wine hall withstood those appointments. So they were probably banging against the walls, knocking over tables. But Beowulf didn't get knocked over and didn't let go. So he kept holding on, and it was almost like he was holding him with iron bars, like literally he's that strong. And so it even says, many a bench decked with gold broke loose. Essentially, it was just a horrific fight. No sage of the Shieldings ever thought that any creature by any means could shatter the high-horned hall. But this is an epic battle. And then it says, then a strange sound rose, and the North Danes stood, dread horror in every man who heard that wail from the walls. And it is Grendel screaming. The ghastly scream of God's enemy, hell's prisoner, howling out defeat, lamenting his wound. He who was the mightiest of men in those days, in this life of ours, gripped him fast. So now he's just wailing. So first he tries to get away, and they're like wrestling all over the place, knocking down benches and tables and everything else. And Beowulf doesn't want to let go. Of course, he doesn't want to, because Grendel could escape. If Grendel escapes, then what has he really done? So he won't let go. And if it kills him, he's going to hold on to the guy's arm. Okay. And the other warriors try to hit Grendel with their swords. But remember, that can't hurt him. And so the fact that Beowulf said, I'm going to fight him unarmed, and I'm not going to use my sword, but I'm going to use my bare hands, that's the only way he could have been defeated. But it takes, I mean, you think about the level of bravery it would take to say, okay, I'm going to fight them without my sword and armor and shield and all the other stuff that would protect me. I'm just going to fight this monster with my two hands, and that's it. And so Beowulf is the only one strong enough to have done that too. So, it's all, this is just showing more and more how much greater he is than everybody else. So the Beowulf's warriors they're trying to protect Beowulf, but they couldn't know. I mean, no matter how much they stabbed at him, nothing, not even this finest blade on earth, no weapon of any kind could harm him, for he was proof against every sword. So they tried to hurt Grendel and protect Beowulf, but the swords did absolutely nothing. But Beowulf didn't let go. And so even as all this other stuff is happening, and even as they're writhing all over the place, Beowulf holds on and holds on and holds on and holds on. And it's funny because at this point, this is, you know, so from this, the severance from this life would be anguish to him. This is Grendel on that day of pain, and his alien spirit would journey far into fiend's keeping. So he's going to hell or whatever. But he says, you know, before he'd always come in here with joy in his heart that he was going to get to eat people, inflicted misery on mankind who had, and he fought with God, you know, against what was right. But today his body is not doing what he wants it to, because Beowulf won't let him go. He can't, he's not strong enough to get Beowulf to let him go. They both hate each other. Each loathed the other alive. They both want the other one dead. And he felt bodily pain. A great rent appeared in his shoulder. The sinews split. The muscles tore. To Beowulf was glory given. Grendel, dying, was forced to flee, finding his lair to die. He really does. He goes and dies without his arm, because Beowulf held on to him so tightly, but Grendel wanted to get away so badly that Grendel left his arm behind. It's kind of like, I mean, you think about like the you've probably seen that, but they have the stories where they have the, you know, the hunters have those traps out for wolves or whatever, or bears, and then the bear gets in, you know, the trap, gets a foot stuck in the trap, and they'd rather gnaw their own foot off to get away. Well, that's kind of what happens. Grendel rips his own arm off to get away from Beowulf. And yet, because of that, that's a grave injury. So he leaves, and he leaves a trail of blood, and he leaves to die. And so it even says all that the Danes had wished that the deadly clash achieved. So what they hoped for happened. The hero who came from Gateland to help Hrothgar saved Hrothgar's hall by killing Grendel. His oath to the East Danes the gate fulfilled, and he relieved their anguish too, all the deep sorrows. So it's, and what do they do with the arm? Because remember, he's holding his arm. So Grendel runs out of the hall, and Beowulf is just left holding this gigantic arm. I mean, that's why I say whenever I think about, you know, it's against Sasquatch. So Sasquatch is supposed to be like 8 feet tall, super big, you know, huge shoulders, long arms, all that. Well, so he's got this big old hairy arm in his grasp, and they're like, oh my God, you ripped his arm off. And yay. And so they're cheering and everything. And then of course what happens? Well, they take the arm and they nail it up onto the roof. Well, they nail it probably up in a rafter. It's really, that's what the original text, it's like you know how the cross beam underneath a roof, you know, if the roof is, if under the roof is it kind of exposed in a hall, which they would have been at this point, then it would have been one of those rafter, a beam that goes across from the edge of one roof, you know, the one wall to the other. And so they nailed it up on one of those beams as a token of what Beowulf has done, of course. And then the last thing is really, this last part of it is just being praised and being given gifts. Now, this is important because it's just like with the Iliad, when Achilles went off and did his fighting, he came back, and when he came back, then, you know, he had done some wonderful thing, and so Agamemnon gave him Briseis, you know, as a trophy. But then you could also get gold, and you could also get riches. So essentially you bring all the riches to the king, and then the king separates it all and gives out to the warriors what they deserve. And so Beowulf killed Grendel, and so now it's Hrothgar's, essentially his duty. This is part of what, you know, that system of fealty. I'll put that word in here again. So it's Hrothgar's duty it's required of him as the king to reward the warrior who did the best job. So he's going to reward all of them for being brave and everything. And yet he's going to reward Beowulf most. And so this kind of reiterates those, what happened. So then in the morning, everybody's cheering. They all come out to see the wonder. And what is it? It's the arm, you know. They know, they essentially go through and tell the story how in defeat he fled to the demon's mere, beaten and doomed, leaving blood trails, and he's going to die. And even when he goes, he goes out and he actually ends up in a pond, and he dives down into the pond. We'll get to that again next week. But where he went, the water seethed with his gore, with the blood that he was, essentially, because he was bleeding out. I mean, he had his arm missing. A swirl of waves, all intermingled with his dark flux. That's all blood, wound fluids. Death marked, he died. Joylessly in his fen lair, he gave up his life. Blah, blah. Hell claimed him, because remember, he was bad. So they all followed this trail, and then they came back and went, yay, he's gone. He's dead. And then they proclaim Beowulf's glory. So, and they praise him, and isn't he wonderful? Never was there ever a better shield man of finer kingdom. But they didn't like mock Hrothgar. He was a good king. And so it's not like they made fun of him, they just praised Beowulf. So Unferth, I'm sure, wasn't so happy, because remember, they had all done that whole thing where Unferth mocked him and said that he had lost a race and all this other stuff, and Beowulf had to put him in his place. Well, then the bard comes, and the bard, this is funny because they actually have a bard in here singing, but in truth, the bard was singing this song, was chanting this story, because remember, this was oral literature, this wasn't written down. So the only way they would have had access to all of these stories would be the bards that would travel from place to place and tell these stories. And so it's funny because a bard is singing a story where a bard sings a story, and that's exactly what happened. So the man began to recite with skill Beowulf's deeds, about how wonderful he was, and all the things he'd done. And it was all the things he'd done, okay, not just. But then he also goes through and tells the story of Sigmund and a bunch of other people, and of course, the more and more he goes through, and that you don't have to remember all these different people because there's too many, and yet essentially they go through several warriors, mostly as a relief. Like these were all great warriors, but now Beowulf was even better. So most of them fell in some way or another, but Beowulf is just amazing. He outdoes them all. So it's just another way of giving out, praise. So they praise him, and then the king goes and gets his queen, and then they come out, and actually from this point on, we don't read this part. I don't think we read this part. Let me make sure, because I don't want to go further than we actually read. But I do things different every class, so I want to make sure I do the right thing. But I think we just read to 924. Yeah. So that's all we got to. So at this point is where he's going to praise Beowulf, say you're wonderful and everything, and then give him lots of treasure. Now, all of that treasure, and we're going to skip. But all of that treasure is actually meant to, Beowulf's not going to spend it right now. He's going to take it, and he's going to take it all back to his king, and then his king's going to kind of redistribute it. But that's just how they did things. The other thing that was funny is at the end of this, and it's not in our reading, but people actually take spears and different things, and they're trying to whack it at the arm that's sitting up, that's been nailed to the rafter, and no one can get it to they realize that no weapons can actually hurt it. And so they couldn't wound the demon's arm even after he's dead. He's still, you know, the arm is still impervious to weaponry. Now, next time we're actually going to skip a ways, and there are 2 battles. So if you're watching this video and you still haven't read yet, just know that there are 2 battles that we're dealing with. So the bard sings, blah, 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 and we're skipping all that because I don't think it's really that important, not compared to what else is going on. But, and then Beowulf gets tons and tons of gifts. So you see how much they're, you know, is a mess. But then this is where we start again, 1251 to 1320. Make sure and follow the lines, because this is when Grendel's mom comes. She's angry. Her son comes home from work and he's dead. Well, he, you know, his arm's off, and then he sits in a puddle of his own blood and dies back at home, and she's angry. And so she comes to attack. So that's fight number 2, and it's much briefer, but she attacks and then flees. And so Beowulf is going to have to follow her and fight her under in her own space, in her own cave. And then the last fight is the second set of line numbers so pay close attention. Just read what I have actually assigned. And then, but it deals with the dragon. So that there are really 3 fights in this epic poem. The first one, which is really half of the poem, is Grendel. And then the second half deals with 2 different fights. One not almost immediately afterwards, like the next day, Grendel's mom attacks. And then 50 years later, the dragon. And so but those 2 are also going to be on the test too. So, and that's what you'll have questions about on your journals too. So make sure you read those carefully before you answer the questions. But that's all we have for today. So I'm going to go ahead and end this reading for this week. And then next week we will cover both the 2 battles. I'll try to cover all of Grendel's mom in one battle and all of the dragon in the other battle, in the other chats. So I will see you next week. Thanks.